The phone lit up at 12:47 a.m., casting a pale glow across the dark bedroom. He wasn't snooping. He was just reaching for the charger when the message appeared on her locked screen. Did you get home safe? Tonight was amazing. In that single second, something inside him cracked. This wasn't a vague suspicion or a jealous fantasy. It was clear, sharp, undeniably unfair. While he was home, loyal, exhausted from carrying a marriage he believed in, someone else was thanking his wife for a night she never mentioned. Questions flooded his mind faster than his heart could keep up. Who was she with? How long had this been happening? And how many moments of his life had been quietly stolen without his consent? What he didn't know yet was that this message was only the beginning of a much darker truth, one that would force him to confront betrayal, deception, and himself. Before we dive into this story, take a moment to comment your location and local time below. And if you're ready for a powerful journey of truth and healing, make sure to subscribe to the channel. He lay there, long after the glow faded, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer an explanation. Her breathing beside him was slow, steady, almost peaceful. That was the cruelest part. She slept like someone with nothing to hide, while his mind raced through every moment of the past few months, replaying them with a new, brutal clarity. The late meetings, the sudden gym sessions that started after dinner, the way she had begun guarding her phone as if it were an extension of her skin. He didn't move, not because he was calm, but because he was afraid that if he did, something irreversible would happen. A question asked too soon, a word spoken too loud. The fragile illusion of his life, shattering before he understood what it had really been. By morning, the house looked exactly the same. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, warming the countertop where they had once planned vacations and argued over nothing important. She moved around him easily, humming softly as she poured coffee, kissing his cheek with the same familiar affection. It felt rehearsed now. Every smile, every touch. He wondered how long she had been practicing this version of herself. He watched her closely, searching for cracks. But she was good, too good. Her eyes never lingered on him long enough to reveal guilt. Her voice didn't tremble. If anything, she seemed lighter, more energized, as if she'd slept better than she had in years. That realization settled heavy in his chest. Whatever had happened last night hadn't weighed on her at all. At work, he barely heard the conversations around him. Emails went unanswered. Meetings blurred together. The message replayed in his mind like a warning siren. He resisted the urge to check his phone every few minutes, half expecting another notification to confirm his worst fears. Nothing came. The silence was almost mocking. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. One message wasn't a full story. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was innocent. But deep down, he knew the tone, the intimacy. Those weren't the words of a casual acquaintance. Those were the words of someone who believed they mattered. That evening, he noticed how she angled her phone away from him while texting, how quickly she locked the screen when he walked into the room. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. And somehow, that subtlety hurt more. It meant she'd been careful, intentional. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice repeated enough times to become habit. He thought about confronting her then, asking the question burning through his chest. But another thought stopped him. If she was lying, she would lie again. And if she told the truth, was he ready to hear it? So he waited. Days passed, and with each one, he noticed more. Her excuses came easier now. Delivered without hesitation, she spoke of new coworkers he'd never heard of plans that changed at the last minute. He nodded along, playing his part, all while feeling like a stranger in his own marriage. At night, he lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, now distorted by suspicion. Every vibration of her phone made his pulse spike. Sometimes she stepped into the bathroom to take calls. Other times, she smiled at a message and tucked the phone away when she noticed him watching. She never explained the smile. She didn't have to. The distance said everything. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal he suspected. It was the realization that she had been living another life parallel to his, one where he was absent, unnecessary. He wondered if she felt relief when she left the house, if being with him had become a role she performed out of obligation. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, he studied her face, memorizing it as if it might soon belong to someone else entirely. He noticed how confident she looked, how sure of herself. It struck him then that this version of her, the vibrant, self-assured woman, hadn't emerged because of him. It had emerged in spite of him, or perhaps away from him. He excused himself early that night, retreating to the bedroom under the guise of exhaustion. In reality, he needed space to think, to plan, because somewhere between denial and despair, something else had taken shape inside him. Determination. If she was lying, he wouldn't beg for the truth. He would find it. He began with the smallest things, not invading her privacy outright, but observing patterns, times, names, mentioned too casually. He noted the nights she came home later than usual, the mornings she left earlier. He memorized her routines, the way a detective memorizes a suspect's alibi. Each discovery chipped away at what little piece he had left. Yet strangely, the more he learned, the calmer he became. Knowledge, even painful knowledge, was better than uncertainty. It gave him control in a situation where he'd felt powerless. Still, doubt crept in during quiet moments. What if he was wrong? What if this was paranoia, fueled by insecurity? He questioned himself constantly, torn between trusting his instincts and fearing that his mind was sabotaging him. But then there were the moments that erased all doubt. Like the night she laughed softly at a message and turned away, unaware that he was watching her reflection in the darkened window. That laugh didn't belong to him anymore. He realized then that whatever was happening, it had already changed them. Even if she ended it tomorrow, even if she swore it meant nothing, the damage was done. Trust, once fractured, didn't simply heal on its own. He didn't know yet how far this betrayal went, or who exactly stood on the other side of that message, but he felt it in his bones. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was a door she had opened willingly, and once a door like that is opened, it rarely closes without something being lost forever. The next morning, he woke before the alarm, his mind already heavy with plans he never imagined he would make. He watched her sleep for a long moment, searching her face for the woman he thought he knew. There was no sign of guilt there, no shadow of the secrets she carried so effortlessly. For the first time in years, he felt like a guest in his own bed. He decided not to change his behavior. That was important. Suspicion made people sloppy, and he couldn't afford to be sloppy. He kissed her goodbye, wished her a good day, and left the house with the same calm tone he'd used for years. Inside, though, something had hardened. He was done being the last person to know the truth about his own life. At work, he used his lunch break to sit alone in his car, staring at the steering wheel while thoughts tangled themselves into knots. He replayed their early years together, the cheap apartment, the shared dreams, the way they once talked for hours about the future. Back then, loyalty hadn't been a question. It had been an assumption. Somewhere along the way, that assumption had become a liability. That evening, she came home later than usual, not dramatically late, just late enough to be believable. She mentioned traffic, sighed like the day had drained her, and headed straight for the shower. He listened to the water run and realized she hadn't asked him a single question about his day. Not one. It struck him how little space he occupied in her thoughts now. While she was in the bathroom, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He froze. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure she could hear it over the running water. He didn't touch the phone. He didn't need to. The vibration alone felt like confirmation of everything he feared. That night, after she fell asleep, he slipped quietly out of bed and sat in the dark living room. He told himself this was still a marriage, that there were lines he shouldn't cross. But another voice answered back, colder and clearer. Those lines had already been crossed. Just not by him. He opened his laptop and began searching. Nothing dramatic, no illegal spying, just public information, social media, mutual connections, patterns. It felt strange, investigating the life of the woman he had built his own around. Stranger still was how easy it was to find inconsistencies. Accounts she'd stopped tagging him in, photos from work events she never mentioned, comments from people whose names he didn't recognize. One name appeared more than once, not enough to scream guilt, but enough to whisper it. He stared at the profile picture longer than he should have, trying to read a story from a stranger's smile. Whoever this was, they looked confident, comfortable, like someone who didn't worry about consequences. He closed the laptop, suddenly exhausted. Knowing a name didn't bring relief. It only made the situation more real, more dangerous. Because now, the betrayal had a shape. The following days settled into a tense rhythm. He watched. He waited. He listened more than he spoke. She noticed the change. He could tell, but misread it as distance rather than suspicion. That worked in his favor. People rarely imagine the truth when a lie feels more convenient. One afternoon, she mentioned an upcoming work dinner. The words slid out easily. Rehearsed? He nodded, offered encouragement, and asked what time she thought she'd be home. She shrugged, said she wasn't sure. That uncertainty used to mean flexibility. Now it felt like a warning. The night of the dinner, he sat alone at the kitchen table, long after dark. The house unnaturally quiet. He imagined her laughing somewhere else, sharing parts of herself he hadn't seen in months. The thought made his chest ache. But beneath the pain, anger simmered. Not explosive anger, focused anger. When she finally came home, her cheeks were flushed, her energy high. She spoke quickly, almost too quickly, filling the space with unnecessary details. He listened, nodding, noting which questions she avoided answering. When she went to bed, he stayed up, staring at the door long after it closed. He realized then that he wasn't just afraid of losing her. He was afraid of what this betrayal said about his own life, about how easily his reality had been rewritten without his consent. That fear fueled him more than rage ever could. A week later, an opportunity presented itself. She left her phone charging in the car while she ran back into the house for her keys. He sat there, alone, the device inches from his hand. This was the moment he'd been dreading and anticipating all at once. He hesitated. Crossing this line meant there was no turning back, but so did pretending everything was fine, while his marriage quietly collapsed. With a steady breath, he picked up the phone. It was locked. Relief and frustration collided inside him. Part of him was glad. Another part felt foolish for expecting it to be easy. He put the phone back exactly where it had been and stepped out of the car just as she returned. The drive was silent. That night, he made a decision. If the truth wasn't going to reveal itself willingly, he would stop waiting for permission to protect his own heart. He didn't want revenge. He wanted clarity. He wanted to understand how a life built on shared promises could unravel so quietly. As he lay awake beside her once more, listening to her breathe, he understood something painful but important. Whatever he discovered next would change him, not because of what she had done, but because of what he was finally ready to face. And somewhere deep down, he sensed that the real story, the one that would explain everything, was only just beginning. Sleep stopped coming easily after that night. He moved through his days with the hollow efficiency of someone functioning on instinct alone. At work, his colleagues noticed he was quieter, more withdrawn, but no one pressed him. He welcomed the silence. It gave him space to think, to sharpen the questions forming in his mind. He began to notice how carefully she curated her stories now, the way she offered explanations before he asked for them, the way her tone lifted when she talked about being busy, as if productivity itself could shield her from scrutiny. He wondered if she realized how transparent it all felt to him, or if she truly believed she was still in control of the narrative. One evening, he suggested they have dinner out together. Nothing fancy, just a familiar place they used to love. For a brief moment, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe even hesitation, before she smiled and agreed. That hesitation stayed with him. It felt like confirmation that time with him had become an inconvenience. At the restaurant, they sat across from each other under warm lights that once made everything feel intimate. Now, the glow only emphasized the distance between them. She spoke about work, about a new project that excited her. He listened closely, catching small inconsistencies, moments where details blurred or shifted. He didn't interrupt. He simply filed them away. When the waiter brought the check, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it instinctively, then flipped it face down with practiced ease. He watched her hands as she did it, steady, confident, the hands of someone who had nothing to fear, or someone who had rehearsed this moment many times before in driving home. He felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Not sharp, not explosive, just heavy. He realized he was mourning something that had already ended, even if neither of them had said it out loud. The version of their marriage he believed in no longer existed. What remained was a fragile arrangement built on omission. That night, he dreamed of their wedding day, the vows, the promises spoken with certainty. He woke before dawn, the words echoing in his head like an accusation. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, and accepted something he'd been avoiding. Trust had already been broken. Whether he had proof or not no longer mattered. The following week, he adjusted his schedule subtly. He left work earlier on certain days, came home at different times. Observing how she reacted, sometimes she seemed relieved. Other times, almost irritated. He noticed how often she asked where he was going, who he was meeting. The irony wasn't lost on him. One afternoon, as he sorted through old paperwork in the home office, he came across a stack of printed photos from years ago, trips they'd taken, smiles that looked genuine. He studied her face in those images, trying to find the moment where things began to shift. But photographs were liars. They captured happiness without context, froze moments without revealing what followed. He put the photos away and closed the drawer gently, as if handling something fragile. In a way, he was. Those memories still mattered to him, even if they no longer meant the same thing to her. The first real crack in her armor came unexpectedly. She mentioned a colleague's name in passing, one he recognized from his late-night searches. She spoke casually, unaware that his body had gone rigid at the sound. He kept his expression neutral, asked a simple follow-up question. Her answer came a beat too late. That pause told him more than her words ever could. From that moment on, he listened with renewed focus. He noticed how that name appeared only in safe contexts, always surrounded by other names, other stories. He wondered how many conversations she'd rehearsed to ensure nothing slipped through unfiltered. He didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed more than suspicion. He needed understanding. Because part of him still wanted to believe there was a reason something broken inside their marriage that he had failed to see. But the truth, when it came, arrived without compassion. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon. She was in the shower, music playing loudly enough to drown out the world. He was folding laundry in the bedroom when her phone, left unattended on the nightstand, lit up again. This time, the screen stayed on longer. He didn't plan it. He didn't think. He simply looked. The message preview was brief, but devastatingly familiar in tone. Casual, intimate, confident. It referenced a moment he hadn't shared with her, a joke he didn't understand. Proof that there was an entire language between them he was not meant to hear. His hands shook as he set the phone back down. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. It was real, and it was happening right under his roof. When she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, she smiled at him as if nothing had changed. He returned the smile automatically, though it felt foreign on his face. In that moment, he understood how deeply the deception ran, how easily she could switch between lives. That night, he didn't sleep at all. Instead, he lay awake, staring into the darkness, piecing together the fragments, the late nights, the guarded phone, the sudden confidence. It all fit now, forming a picture he hadn't wanted to see. The unfairness of it burned. She had choices. She had options. And instead of facing him, she had chosen secrecy. By morning, his sorrow had hardened into resolve. He didn't know yet how this would end. He didn't know what he would do once everything was out in the open. But he knew one thing, with absolute certainty. He would not remain silent. He would not continue living inside a story written without his consent. As she kissed him goodbye and left for the day, he watched her go with new eyes. Not the eyes of a trusting husband, but of someone who had finally seen the truth. And once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. He spent the following days in a quiet state of observation, blending routine with vigilance. Every glance she threw at her phone, every pause in her conversation, every seemingly casual text message, all were now data points in a growing map of betrayal. He cataloged them meticulously, not with obsessive compulsion, but with a clarity born from necessity. He needed to understand, to see the pattern clearly before he acted. Evenings became exercises in restraint. While she cooked or tidied, he stayed close enough to notice subtle movements, yet distant enough to avoid detection. The way she angled her phone, the slight tightening of her lips when she sent a message, the casual but deliberate avoidance of eye contact, it all painted a story more detailed than words could convey. One afternoon, a seemingly mundane detail made him pause. She mentioned a dinner with colleagues, one he hadn't heard of before. He asked casually who was attending, keeping his tone neutral. Her response was smooth, almost too smooth, listing names he didn't recognize but dismissing his curiosity with practiced ease. The dissonance between her words and her manner sparked a dangerous certainty. She had been rehearsing this life without him for months, perhaps years. At night, he found himself wandering through shared memories, like a detective retracing old crime scenes. The apartment felt foreign. Every familiar object, a potential witness to a life that had been quietly rerouted. Their favorite cafe, the park where they had picnicked last summer, even the couch they shared, each held evidence of a history he now questioned. Who had she become when he wasn't looking? And who did she want him to believe she was? The message from weeks ago echoed in his mind incessantly. Did you get home safe? Tonight was amazing. It had been the first chink in the armor of their marriage, and now it seemed almost prophetic. He realized that the night it had arrived was a hinge point, a moment when the truth had begun to slide quietly into place. He began subtly testing boundaries, asking about innocuous details, seeing how she responded. Sometimes she faltered, just for a heartbeat, just enough to betray the cracks beneath her practiced facade. Those moments were fleeting, but invaluable. Each one confirmed that his instincts were accurate, and that her world had been carefully constructed to exclude him from the parts she deemed important. One evening, he came home to find her unusually tired. Her eyes betrayed a flicker of stress, quickly masked by a smile. He noticed her phone lay face up on the counter. It buzzed silently, a vibration too low for her to hear. Without touching it, he watched as her hand hovered over the screen, hesitated, then swiped it away with a controlled gesture. That hesitation was a window, a brief admission that someone else had a hold over her attention, over her time, over her choices. He began to realize the depth of what he was facing. This wasn't a simple affair. This was a double life, carefully maintained, a network of secrets designed to shield her from confrontation, while she engaged fully elsewhere. The unfairness of it gnawed at him, the blatant disregard for the trust he had offered, the effortlessness with which she compartmentalized their lives. In the following days, he started tracking patterns in her schedule, noting discrepancies between her stated plans and the subtle changes in behavior. Small things, like the way her tone shifted when answering calls, the way she delayed responding to texts, or the sudden appearance of receipts for places he'd never visited with her. He cataloged them in a quiet notebook, methodical, meticulous. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle, a clue that would eventually reveal the full picture. But amid the surveillance, he also confronted his own feelings. Anger surged unpredictably, then ebbed, replaced by sadness, then frustration. He questioned himself. Had he failed to notice the early signs? Was he partially responsible for the distance? Could he have prevented this unraveling? These questions didn't have answers, only reflections of a pain that refused to be soothed by reason. Then came the first direct confrontation with a tangible clue. While she stepped out briefly to run an errand, he noticed a notification flash on her laptop, a calendar invite for an event she hadn't mentioned. The name attached was familiar now from the threads of her messages and social media interactions. He sat in silence, processing the confirmation that the network of deception was more elaborate than he had imagined. When she returned, he greeted her normally, his expression carefully neutral. He didn't speak of the invite. He didn't accuse. That would come later. For now, the goal was clarity, not chaos. He needed to understand the mechanics of her life before he dismantled the illusions she had built. Over the next week, he subtly guided conversations toward topics that might reveal more. He asked about her colleagues, her social events, even innocuous office gossip. She answered, but her answers were polished, carefully framed, always steering back to the safe zone. He realized the person she presented in these moments was a version of herself she controlled entirely, a version that allowed no cracks, no vulnerability, and no access to him. His frustration grew, but so did his resolve. The unfairness of the situation fueled a sharp focus. He couldn't change the past, but he could navigate the present with precision. Each observation, each fleeting hesitation she displayed, was a key to understanding not just what she was doing, but who she had become and who she had allowed herself to be when he wasn't watching. Late one night, the house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He sat in the living room, phone in hand, reviewing old messages he had previously dismissed. Now, with the benefit of context and the clarity of suspicion, each message felt like a breadcrumb. One phrase here, one omission there. It was a trail, delicate but unmistakable, leading toward the truth he had feared to confront. He realized that this was not merely a story of betrayal, but also a story of transformation, hers, certainly, but his as well. He was being forced to see the hidden parts of a person he thought he knew completely, to confront the fractures in his own perception, and to redefine the boundaries of trust and self-respect. By the end of the week, he had accumulated enough fragments, enough patterns, to see the edges of a reality that was both shocking and inevitable. He understood that when he finally confronted her, the conversation would not be simple. It would not be contained, but he also knew that clarity, painful as it might be, was necessary. The half-truths, the omissions, the rehearsed smiles, they could no longer dictate the terms of his life. He sat back, exhaling slowly. A sense of grim determination settled over him. He didn't yet know the full extent of her actions, but he knew he would find out, and once he did, he would face it head-on, not with blind rage, but with the unflinching resolve of someone who had already seen the first cracks in the foundation, and knew that the house could no longer stand unchanged. As he prepared for another night of observation, he realized something profound. The betrayal was not just an attack on their relationship. It was a catalyst for him to confront his own complacency, to reassess his boundaries, and to reclaim the agency he had unknowingly surrendered. And with that understanding came the first glimmer of empowerment. Sharp and cold, but undeniable, the weekend arrived with an eerie calm. He moved through it with a sense of quiet purpose, observing, analyzing, storing every detail that might be relevant. The subtle patterns she exhibited, previously dismissed as quirks or coincidences, now revealed themselves as deliberate behaviors, choreographed to maintain a facade of normalcy. Every smile, every laugh, every casual glance at her phone became a piece in a puzzle that he was determined to solve. Saturday morning began like any other. She made breakfast, humming softly as she moved through the kitchen, but he noticed how carefully she set her phone on the counter, screen face down, just beyond his reach. The positioning felt deliberate, a silent assertion of boundaries he no longer trusted. He didn't comment. He simply observed, cataloging this small act of secrecy in the mental ledger he was compiling. After breakfast, she suggested a walk around the neighborhood. Her tone was light, carefree, but he detected subtle hesitation. Perhaps she doubted whether he would accept the invitation, or perhaps it was simply the way she balanced her secrets against his presence. He agreed, outwardly casual, inwardly calculating the timing, the route, and the potential opportunities for insight. As they walked, he asked about her week, about friends, colleagues, and projects. Her responses were smooth, measured, yet there were pauses, tiny inflections in her voice that betrayed the rehearsed nature of her answers. He caught them all. Each pause, each hesitation, each slip of tone was a window into a reality she thought he wouldn't notice. Returning home, she excused herself to take a call in the study. The door closed behind her with a soft click. He stood in the hallway, pretending to adjust a picture frame, ears tuned to the muffled conversation beyond the door. He didn't understand the words entirely, but he didn't need to. The cadence, the emotion, the subtle laughter, it all confirmed what he had been fearing. She was sharing pieces of herself with someone else, moments she had denied him. Later, when she returned, she appeared composed, cheerful even. The contrast between the private truth he had just sensed and the public performance she offered him was sharp, almost painful. He realized that she had perfected the art of compartmentalization, the ability to maintain parallel lives without letting them intersect. And in that realization, a cold clarity settled within him. That night, he retreated to the bedroom early, ostensibly to read, but in reality, to think. The house was quiet, the shadows long, and the familiar hum of the night outside felt intrusive somehow, as if it reminded him that the world he knew at home was already fractured. He reviewed events from the past weeks, connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated, the slight delays in her replies, the sudden enthusiasm for social events, the changes in routine that once seemed minor. Together, they painted a pattern impossible to ignore. Sleep didn't come. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness, thinking not just about what she had done, but about who she had become. The woman he had married, whom he believed he knew completely, now seemed like a stranger. The intimacy, the shared understanding, the unspoken trust, they had been eroded slowly, quietly, until the foundation of their life together was riddled with fractures. By Sunday, he realized that the situation required more than observation. He needed confirmation, not proof to punish, but understanding to reclaim his own agency. He began to prepare, mentally and practically, for the moment he would confront the reality head-on. Every step, every piece of information gathered, was a preparation for that inevitable conversation. Later that afternoon, she suggested they tidy the garage together. He followed her instructions mechanically, all while scanning the space for evidence, small items that might indicate her outside interactions. His mind cataloged receipts, stray envelopes, small items that didn't belong. Each one added to the mosaic of truth forming in his mind. The unfairness of the situation, the deceit, the secrecy was now tangible. He felt a mix of betrayal, sorrow, and resolve building within him. During a pause, she stepped away to retrieve something from the car. He noticed her phone left on the workbench, face up this time. It vibrated quietly. He didn't touch it, but he observed the subtle rhythm of her hand as she noticed it, picked it up, and set it down again without unlocking it was telling. That hesitation, the control she exercised, the confidence in secrecy, it all underscored the reality he was facing. Returning to the house, she laughed lightly about something from her day, oblivious to the mental calculations he had just performed. The contrast between her light-hearted demeanor and the weight of what he now understood struck him with unusual force. He realized the depth of her duplicity. It wasn't just an affair, not merely a series of lies. It was a carefully maintained alternate life, constructed to exclude him from knowledge and choice. By evening, he felt the subtle shift in himself. The anger that had simmered quietly was now tempered with strategic patience. He understood that rash actions, impulsive confrontations, would only serve to entangle him further. In a web she had spun so carefully, he needed precision. Observation was no longer enough. He needed insight, clarity, and then control. That night, he sat alone in the living room, reflecting on the last weeks. He considered their shared history, the milestones they had celebrated, the promises exchanged. Every memory was now tinged with suspicion, yet each also reminded him of what he had once trusted. That trust, now betrayed, was a lesson in itself. It taught him that love and loyalty, no matter how deeply felt, could be manipulated if one did not maintain awareness. In the quiet of the night, he finally allowed himself to envision the confrontation to come. He did not imagine shouting, tears, or chaos. Instead, he pictured a calm, methodical engagement, questions asked with precision, observations presented without accusation, an unwavering presence that demanded honesty without theatrics. He recognized that the power in this situation lay not in anger, but in measured resolve. As dawn approached, he felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. The unfairness of her duplicity was undeniable, but so too was his awakening. He had been passive, perhaps too trusting, and that had allowed the fractures to deepen unnoticed. But now he was awake, fully aware, and prepared to face what came next. The weekend ended without incident, but the landscape of their relationship had shifted irreversibly. He understood that the coming days would not be ordinary. Each interaction, each word exchanged, would carry weight. He was ready to navigate this altered terrain, not with fear or denial, but with vigilance and purpose. In that readiness, he found a fragile sense of empowerment. The unfairness of the situation, the deception, the secrecy, all of it was real, undeniable, and deeply painful, yet it also illuminated his own capacity for patience, observation, and strategic thinking. He realized that the coming confrontation would be more than about betrayal. It would be about reclaiming the narrative of his own life, asserting boundaries that had been quietly disregarded, and confronting the reality of a relationship that had been irreversibly altered. By the time she returned that Sunday evening, he felt a calm resolve settling within him. He greeted her with practiced normalcy, all while his mind cataloged every detail of her presence, the subtle tension in her posture, the way she moved around the room, but the way her eyes avoided his. They were all pieces of a truth he no longer feared to face. And so the stage was set. The observations had been gathered, the patterns recognized, and the clarity achieved. The next steps would require courage, honesty, and a steadfast commitment to confronting the reality that had been hidden in plain sight for too long. In that moment, he understood something profound. The journey through betrayal was not only about uncovering her secrets, it was also about reclaiming himself. Monday arrived with a sense of muted tension that seemed to cling to the walls of the house. He moved through his morning routine mechanically, every action precise, every word measured. Even brushing his teeth felt deliberate. A small act of grounding amid the storm of emotions swirling beneath the surface. Breakfast was quiet. She sipped her coffee, scrolling through her phone, seemingly oblivious to the change in him. That oblivion, he realized, was a weapon she wielded daily, a shield that kept him at bay, while she navigated her secret world. By mid-morning, he found himself walking the neighborhood, ostensibly for exercise, but in truth to think. Each step allowed him to process the fragments of truth he had collected, to analyze the inconsistencies, the patterns, the subtle indicators of betrayal. He recalled her expressions over the past week, the brief hesitation before answering a question, the way her smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes, the carefully timed laughter, designed to deflect suspicion. All of it now seemed deliberate, rehearsed, an intricate performance meant to maintain a fragile illusion. At work, he maintained the usual facade. Colleagues noticed the change. He was quieter, more focused, yet distant in a way that suggested preoccupation. He welcomed the observation. It afforded him the cover to conduct his mental investigation without interference. He began making careful notes, not on paper, but in memory, the exact phrasing of her sentences, the timestamps on messages she received, the fleeting emotional cues that hinted at interactions outside their home. Every detail mattered. Every detail could illuminate the full scope of the betrayal. That evening, she mentioned attending a social gathering with friends from her book club. His instinct urged him to question her, to demand details, to confront immediately. But he resisted. He had learned that impulsive confrontation could lead to deflection, to lies layered upon lies. Instead, he chose observation. He noted her reactions as she prepared, the phone in her hand, the quick check of notifications, the careful concealment of messages from sight. Each gesture was deliberate, each choice reinforcing the pattern he had begun to recognize. While she was gone, he examined their home with fresh eyes. Spaces that had once felt familiar now seemed charged with meaning. The living room sofa, the kitchen counter, even the hallway walls, he noticed how she arranged her world to accommodate secrecy. Small details, previously overlooked, now carried weight. Receipts for places he didn't know she visited, the subtle relocation of objects, the quiet adjustments in the home's routine, all became evidence in a puzzle that he was determined to solve. When she returned, her demeanor was composed, her energy bright. She spoke animatedly about her evening, about friends, about conversations that had taken place. He listened, noting every nuance, every shift in tone, every carefully chosen word. Her confidence now carried a new weight. It was not merely social ease, but an assertion of control. He realized she had grown adept at managing dual realities, and that her ability to compartmentalize was far more advanced than he had initially feared. Late that night, he sat alone in the study, reflecting on the patterns and behaviors he had observed. The unfairness of it struck him again, not just the betrayal itself, but the skill with which it had been executed. There was no clumsiness, no accidental revelation. Everything had been deliberate, calculated, and rehearsed. The thought was both infuriating and illuminating. He understood now that the challenge was not simply to expose her, but to navigate the truth without losing his own sense of self. The following morning, he initiated subtle tests, casual questions, innocent inquiries, all designed to observe reactions rather than provoke. Each answer she gave was polished, measured, and often indirect. Yet in the slight hesitations, in the fleeting micro-expressions, he found confirmation. She was maintaining a world apart from him, and he was not a part of it. The realization was painful, yet necessary. Clarity, even when harsh, was preferable to ignorance. As the week progressed, he began to reconstruct her network of interactions in his mind. Names mentioned casually, messages sent with carefully crafted brevity, activities omitted from conversation. All of it formed a map. It was a delicate operation, requiring patience and precision. He could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface, but it was controlled, tempered by the knowledge that strategic observation would yield more understanding than immediate confrontation ever could. One evening, he observed a minor slip, a glance at her phone that lingered too long, a small smile at a message he did not see. The subtlety of it was almost elegant. He recognized in that moment how practiced she had become in balancing these dual lives. The unfairness of it was compounded by the realization that her skill in deception was greater than he had anticipated, yet the clarity it offered him was invaluable. By midweek, he began to anticipate the patterns she could not fully mask. He noticed the rhythm of her interactions, the timing of messages, the subtle shifts in routine. Every observation reinforced a truth that had become undeniable. She was living an alternate reality, one that excluded him entirely, one that he had not been invited to enter. The weight of that realization was heavy, but it carried with it a strange empowerment. Knowing the extent of her deception gave him a measure of control in a situation that had once felt entirely out of his hands. That night, he rehearsed the confrontation in his mind, not with anger or accusation, but with calm, with purpose. He envisioned asking questions that demanded clarity, presenting observations that could not be dismissed, and maintaining an unwavering presence that would compel honesty. He recognized that the power he sought was not in vengeance, but in reclaiming agency over his own life, over the truth that had been denied him. The weekend arrived again, bringing with it both tension and opportunity. He observed her carefully, noting small behavioral shifts as she prepared to leave for social engagements. Her routine was consistent yet controlled, every gesture calculated. The subtle anxiety in her movements confirmed what he already suspected. Even the person orchestrating this alternate life carried within it a strain, a vulnerability that he had only begun to perceive. By Sunday evening, he felt a quiet confidence. The observations had accumulated into insight, and the insight into understanding. He had traced the contours of a reality that had once seemed impenetrable, and in doing so, had rediscovered his own capacity for awareness, patience, and strategy. The unfairness of her actions remained, undeniable and painful, but he was no longer passive. He was awake. He was vigilant, and he was prepared to confront the consequences with measured resolve. In that stillness, he recognized the profound truth of his position. Betrayal, while painful, had revealed not just the duplicity of another, but also the strength within himself. The journey ahead would demand courage, honesty, and steadfast commitment. But he was ready. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of agency return, a quiet knowledge that he could navigate the fractured reality before him without losing himself in the process. And in that realization, he found a fragile but undeniable sense of empowerment. Monday morning arrived with an unusual stillness. The house, typically buzzing with the small noises of routine, felt unusually heavy. He moved through the kitchen quietly, pouring coffee, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, and noting how she moved with practiced casualness. She was there, but only in appearance. Her energy, her attention, were divided, threading through invisible spaces he could not occupy. He realized, painfully, that the woman he married had become a master of compartmentalization, and he had been unwittingly excluded from the most critical compartments. He made a decision not to confront her immediately. The message he had seen weeks ago, "Did you get home safe?" tonight was amazing, had been the first crack in the foundation, but acting on impulse now would risk losing control of the narrative entirely. He needed evidence, not conjecture, clarity, not emotion, his mind sharpened with purpose, the raw sting of betrayal transforming into strategic resolve. At work, he observed a new level of detachment. Colleagues noticed him drifting mentally, but he maintained a mask of professionalism. He used the quiet hours to revisit every minor inconsistency from the past month, the subtle delays in her replies, her sudden interest in evening events he wasn't invited to, the careful concealment of her phone. Each detail, once benign, now felt like a piece in a meticulous puzzle that was slowly revealing its contours. That evening, she mentioned attending a late-night gallery opening with a friend whose name he didn't recognize. He asked casually who else might be attending. Her answer was smooth, rehearsed names he didn't know, locations he hadn't visited, times that seemed intentionally vague. He nodded, asked a follow-up, and noted the slight hesitation in her tone. Small, almost imperceptible, yet meaningful. She was careful, and he recognized the depth of her practiced duplicity. He stayed awake long after she returned. She entered with the same casual smile, as though the evening had been ordinary, unremarkable. He observed the subtle details of her demeanor, the confident stride, the slight curl of a smile when she checked her phone, the way she tucked herself into routines that excluded him from meaningful knowledge. His stomach tightened as he realized how completely she had mastered the art of living a divided life. The next day, he began subtly testing boundaries, casual questions, gentle inquiries, none of them accusatory. He observed her reactions with care. Sometimes her answer was delayed, almost imperceptibly. Other times, she seemed to flinch at the implication behind the question, as though she recognized the subtext, even when he tried to keep it neutral. Each small reveal was a confirmation. His instincts were correct. She was living a life beyond his reach. During the week, he began piecing together a rough map of her interactions. Certain names kept appearing in conversation, messages, and social media activity. They were innocuous on the surface, yet he detected patterns, a rhythm of attention she paid to others that he had long been unaware of. He recorded these patterns mentally, noting times, responses, and emotional shifts, each observation reinforcing the certainty of her duplicity. One evening, he noticed her phone left unattended, vibrating quietly. He did not touch it, he only observed. Her hand hovered, hesitated, and then retreated. That tiny moment revealed volumes about her inner calculations, the care she took to conceal aspects of her life, and the reality he had been unwillingly excluded from. He recognized the subtle cruelty of omission, a life shared partially, carefully curated, yet never wholly revealed. The unfairness of it gnawed at him. This wasn't merely deception, it was the creation of an alternate existence where he had no place. Yet, in that realization, came an unexpected clarity. For the first time, he understood the depth of his own passivity, the ways in which he had surrendered agency by assuming the integrity of his marriage without scrutiny. The betrayal, harsh as it was, became a mirror reflecting his own blind trust, his own willingness to ignore subtle signs. He began to organize his approach. Observation first, evidence second, confrontation last. Impulse had no place in this strategy. He reminded himself that clarity was a weapon, that understanding the mechanics of the situation would allow him to act decisively when the time came. Acting prematurely could result in confusion, in gaslighting, in further deception. Patience, he concluded, was a form of strength. By Thursday, he had observed small but consistent patterns, the timing of messages, her subtle emotional cues when certain names arose, the careful choreography of her social interactions. These details painted a more complete picture of her secret life. Each observation reinforced a fundamental truth. She was leading a parallel existence, meticulously constructed, and he had been excluded from it. The unfairness was undeniable, yet within it lay a roadmap, a path toward understanding, and ultimately, empowerment. That night, he rehearsed conversations in his mind, crafting questions that would demand clarity without allowing evasion. He envisioned presenting his observations calmly, without accusation, allowing facts to speak for themselves. He understood that the power lay not in confrontation itself, but in controlling the narrative through measured revelation. The act of reclaiming his perspective became a subtle but potent form of agency. The weekend offered an opportunity. She left for a brunch with friends, leaving her phone unattended. He noted the placement, the orientation, the slight quiver in her hand as she returned it to the countertop. Each detail confirmed patterns he had already recognized, reinforcing the reality that her attention was divided, her allegiance partially elsewhere. He felt a complex mix of anger, sorrow, and resolve. By Sunday evening, he recognized a shift in himself. The raw, disorienting pain of betrayal had given way to focus. The unfairness remained, but he was no longer powerless. He had seen the patterns, understood the duplicity, and prepared mentally to navigate the inevitable confrontation. He realized that while he could not undo the past, he could reclaim control over his response, his choices, and his understanding of the truth. In the quiet of the night, he reflected on the transformation he had undergone. The betrayal was not only a challenge to the integrity of their relationship, but also a catalyst for his own awakening. He had learned vigilance, patience, and strategic observation. He had seen the fragility of assumptions and the necessity of confronting reality with clarity. The empowerment he felt was subtle but undeniable, a quiet readiness to reclaim agency in a life that had been subtly diverted from him. As the lights dimmed and the house settled into the familiar rhythm of evening, he prepared himself. Observation, clarity, confrontation. The cycle had refined him, honed his awareness, and illuminated the path forward. He was no longer merely a participant in a story written by another's choices. He had become an architect of understanding, poised to navigate the fractured reality before him with calm precision. And so, as the night deepened, he sat alone, contemplating the coming days. He understood that betrayal, while devastating, had provided insight. It had forced him to recognize patterns, question assumptions, and reclaim his sense of agency. The unfairness remained, yet within it lay opportunity, a chance to face the truth, assert boundaries, and navigate the complexities of human relationships with awareness and strength. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. The first light of Monday filtered through the blinds, spilling across the bedroom floor. He lay there, eyes open, replaying the weekend over and over in his mind. Each smile she had offered, each casual mention of friends or colleagues, each carefully timed gesture now carried weight. What had once been ordinary, routine interactions were now evidence of a life she had been building apart from him. He recognized the mastery with which she had compartmentalized her world, the care with which she maintained distance, and the subtlety that allowed her to perform dual roles seamlessly. He got up quietly, letting the routine of morning act as both disguise and anchor. Pouring coffee, he observed her as she moved through the kitchen. She hummed lightly, scrolling through her phone, placing it down strategically, face down, just out of his immediate reach. The casualness of her movements belied the tension he now felt. Every small gesture was loaded with meaning, every innocent habit, a potential window into her private life. He watched without comment, cataloging each nuance carefully, mentally noting patterns that would guide him in the days to come. The drive to work was unusually silent. Normally, they shared the space, exchanging trivial thoughts or morning plans. But the tension between them was palpable even in the absence of words. He felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing down, the knowledge that she was living a parallel existence he had yet to fully map. Each red light, each pause in traffic, became a moment for reflection, for planning, for consolidating the observations that had accumulated over weeks. At work, he maintained his usual demeanor, though colleagues noticed subtle changes, a quiet intensity, a sharper gaze, an absent-minded air. He welcomed it. Invisibility offered freedom, freedom to think, to observe, to prepare. He replayed previous interactions in his mind, examining tones, gestures, and expressions for subtle cues. Every misalignment between words and behavior was a clue. Every omission, a signpost toward the hidden truth. That evening, she mentioned attending a networking event at a local gallery. He asked casually who she would see, what the agenda was. Her responses were measured. Names he didn't recognize offered smoothly, descriptions concise and unembellished. Yet, in the microsecond hesitation before she answered, he detected the same flicker of tension he had noticed in other situations. Small cracks, almost imperceptible, but invaluable to him. She had rehearsed these interactions, carefully constructing the narrative she presented, but subtlety betrayed her control. When she returned, her energy remained composed, a practiced cheerfulness masking the reality he knew existed. He studied her face, Her posture, the rhythm of her movements, the way her hand lingered over her phone before setting it down again. Each gesture confirmed the patterns he had been mapping, the careful balance between her visible self and the hidden self, the duality she maintained with precision. He realized that she had not only grown adept at compartmentalization, but had elevated it to an art form. That night, he sat alone in the living room, letting the quiet envelop him as he reflected. The unfairness of the situation was undeniable. This was not a mere lapse, a fleeting indiscretion, or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate and sustained creation of a life apart from him, conducted with such skill that exposure had not yet been forced. Yet, amid the anger and sorrow, he recognized a strange clarity. Understanding her patterns, observing her behaviors, gave him insight into both her world and his own responses. Knowledge, he realized, was a form of control. Over the next few days, he engaged in subtle testing, casual questions, innocuous inquiries, each designed to observe reactions rather than provoke defensive answers. Her responses were polished, often deflecting, but micro-expressions and slight changes in tone betrayed her rehearsed narrative. Each observation confirmed the dual life she maintained, and yet, paradoxically, each small slip also strengthened his sense of agency. He began to feel a quiet empowerment rooted not in confrontation, but in understanding and preparation. One afternoon, he noticed an overlooked detail, a message preview on her phone that flickered briefly before she set it aside. He didn't read it, didn't attempt to unlock the device. He simply observed the way her fingers hovered momentarily before retreating. The hesitation, the control, the subtle acknowledgement of another presence, all of it deepened his understanding. The unfairness was sharp, but the clarity it provided was invaluable. He recognized that to reclaim agency, he would need patience, strategy, and precision rather than immediate reaction. Later, as they prepared dinner together, he watched her carefully. Noticing the patterns in her conversation and gestures, she spoke with warmth, laughter, and ease. Yet he detected a rhythm that suggested practice, a controlled performance of intimacy. Even in shared spaces, he realized, she had maintained separation, a private sphere of connection that excluded him entirely. The realization was painful, but it also highlighted the boundaries he needed to define for himself. By midweek, he had accumulated enough observations to map a rough structure of her secret life. The patterns were consistent: timing of communications, selective disclosure, carefully managed interactions. These details not only confirmed the scope of the deception, but also illuminated the method she employed to shield herself from discovery. He began mentally rehearsing the steps he would take to confront the situation, understanding that precision and clarity were paramount. That night, he envisioned the confrontation in detail, not with explosive emotion, not with accusation, but with deliberate calm, clear questions, and unwavering presence. He rehearsed phrasing, anticipated evasions, and prepared to anchor the conversation in observable facts rather than speculation. The unfairness of her actions was real, yet his empowerment lay in control over his own responses. He understood that reclaiming agency required clarity, not anger. The weekend arrived again, providing both distance and opportunity. She went out for a social brunch. Leaving her phone unattended, he observed from afar, noting small signs, placement, orientation, subtle movements. Each action reinforced the patterns he had mapped. Every hesitation, every glance, every careful maneuver was a confirmation of the dual reality she maintained. He felt a mix of grief and resolve, anger tempered by strategic patience. By Sunday night, he recognized a shift in himself. The initial shock and disorientation had been replaced by focus, understanding, and readiness. He had seen the breadth of the deception, traced the contours of her hidden interactions, and gained insight into the methods she employed. The unfairness remained, undeniable, Yet he was no longer powerless. Awareness had become a tool, clarity had become strength, and he was poised to navigate the forthcoming confrontation with measured precision. In the quiet hours before sleep, he reflected on the lessons embedded in this painful experience. Betrayal had forced him to reassess assumptions, observe with precision, and reclaim agency he had unknowingly surrendered. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was prepared. The narrative of his life would no longer be written by omission or secrecy. He would confront it with clarity, purpose, and an unflinching commitment to the truth. As he lay back, eyes closed, he understood something profound. While her duplicity had fractured the familiarity and trust in their relationship, it had also catalyzed a transformation within him. He had learned vigilance, patience, and the power of observation. He had discovered the importance of clarity, strategy, and personal agency. The unfairness of her actions remained, but amid it, he had found the tools to face reality, navigate complexity, and reclaim control over his own life. Monday dawned gray and heavy, the clouds hanging low over the city, as if mirroring the weight he carried. He moved through the morning routine with deliberate care, noting every subtle shift in her behavior, every micro-expression, every nuance in tone. The message from weeks ago, "Did you get home safe? Tonight was amazing," had left a permanent mark, a quiet alarm that never ceased. Each interaction now carried hidden layers, and he approached the day with a careful, calculated awareness that had been absent in the past. Breakfast was quiet. She moved around the kitchen efficiently, humming softly, yet he caught the moments when her smile faltered ever so slightly, the subtle shifts in her body language that betrayed awareness of his scrutiny. He recognized these signs, tension managed, gestures moderated, and every action carefully controlled to maintain her curated reality. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching, cataloging each moment mentally. This was no longer a marriage of simple shared lives. It was a delicate performance with him as an unwitting audience. At work, he maintained a practiced calm. Colleagues noticed his detachment, the sharpness in his gaze, the thoughtful pauses before responding. It was as if he was present physically, but fully engaged elsewhere, processing, analyzing, mapping. He replayed the events of the past week. Each social outing, each casual mention of friends, each late night or diverted schedule, now forming a clearer pattern. These fragments, once scattered, were beginning to coalesce into an unmistakable picture. She had been maintaining a life apart from him with precision and intent. That evening, she mentioned a charity gala she intended to attend. He asked casually who else would be present. Her response was smooth, names flowing easily, description concise, but he noticed the subtle hesitation before she replied, a brief flicker in her eyes that lasted a fraction of a second. It was a small crack in her practiced facade, but it was there. He made a mental note of it, understanding that every minor gesture, every tiny hesitation, was a breadcrumb leading him toward the truth. She left for the gala, cheerful and composed, leaving him alone with the house and his thoughts. The silence was both oppressive and clarifying. He reviewed what he knew, what he suspected, and what remained hidden. Each observed pattern timing of texts, micro-expressions, subtle body language added layers of certainty to the suspicion that had been gnawing at him since the first message appeared. The unfairness of it stung sharply, the ease with which she navigated a dual existence while he remained on the outside, excluded and unaware. Yet clarity had a strange power. In understanding her patterns, he gained control over his own reactions. Late that night, he began mapping her behaviors more systematically. He considered the sequences, arrival and departure times, phone use patterns, subtle shifts in tone when certain names arose. Each detail was a data point, contributing to an understanding of a life deliberately kept separate from his own. He recognized the level of skill involved in maintaining these dual realities. It was methodical, rehearsed, and intentional, an unfairness that demanded a response. but one tempered by the knowledge that patience would yield more than immediate confrontation. The next morning, he engaged in subtle testing, innocuous questions, casual inquiries, each designed to gauge reaction without arousing suspicion. Her responses were careful, rehearsed, yet minor hesitations, tiny shifts in posture, and brief micro-expressions betrayed the reality he had long suspected. The duality was present in every interaction. The public version of herself, competent, cheerful, controlled, and the private, hidden self, existing elsewhere. He cataloged the evidence mentally, building an internal dossier with precision and discipline. By midweek, the patterns had become unmistakable. Certain names recurred in her stories, in messages, in subtle references. They were innocuous on the surface, yet a rhythm and consistency revealed deliberate omission and concealment. He observed how her energy changed, how her gestures became more controlled, how her laughter sometimes came a beat too late. Time to mask thought or interaction. Every detail reinforced the conclusion. She was living a parallel life with calculated discretion, and he was being deliberately excluded. Late one evening, she left her phone unattended for a fleeting moment. He noticed the placement, the slight quiver as she touched it before setting it back down face down. He did not read, did not touch. Observation was the priority. Even these fleeting details revealed volumes about her control and awareness. The careful maintenance of secrecy was deliberate and intentional, a stark reminder of the unfairness that had permeated their life together. Yet it also offered clarity. Each subtle signal provided insight into her actions, her choices, and the structure of the alternate life she had been maintaining. As the week drew to a close, he reflected on the growing clarity he had achieved. Betrayal, he realized, was not just an external phenomenon. It illuminated his own blind spots, his unquestioned assumptions, and the ways he had unwittingly allowed complacency to erode awareness. He recognized that patience, strategic observation, and controlled engagement were now his tools for navigating this fractured reality. Anger and hurt were present, but tempered by the realization that understanding, not impulse, would provide the leverage he required. By Sunday evening, a quiet determination had settled over him. The unfairness of her actions remained, undeniable and painful, but he had gained insight, control, and understanding. He prepared mentally for the confrontation that would inevitably come, not with immediate aggression, but with deliberate clarity, calm precision, and the unwavering presence of someone reclaiming agency. He understood that his response would define not only the outcome of the relationship, but also the boundaries of his own life moving forward. In the stillness of the night, he contemplated the dualities at play. Her duplicity had fractured the familiarity and trust of their shared existence. Yet, it had also catalyzed a transformation within him. The process of observation, analysis, and reflection had sharpened his awareness, clarified priorities, and cultivated resilience. The unfairness remained a constant companion, yet within it, he had discovered a sense of empowerment. He lay awake, thinking not of revenge or confrontation, but of clarity, understanding, and the reclamation of his own narrative. Each observed detail, each subtle pattern, each carefully catalogued hesitation contributed to a growing comprehension. Betrayal, while painful, was also a lens through which he could view the truth of the relationship and the reality of his own agency. As the house settled into quietude, he felt a measured sense of readiness. Observation had provided clarity, clarity had provided focus, and focus had yielded strength. He understood that while the journey ahead would challenge him emotionally and psychologically, he was equipped with the tools of insight, patience, and strategic thought. The unfairness of her actions had revealed vulnerabilities, but it had also illuminated a path toward self-assertion, truth, and the reclamation of control over his own life. By the early hours, he resolved to continue his careful monitoring, to gather the remaining pieces of evidence, and to approach the eventual confrontation with calm, precision, he understood that the story was not yet complete, but he was no longer passive. He was aware, prepared, and determined to navigate the fractured reality before him with measured, deliberate action. The unfairness remained, undeniable, but he had transformed the uncertainty into focus, the pain into clarity, and the betrayal into a catalyst for personal empowerment. As dawn approached, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Betrayal had revealed the hidden structures of his relationship, but it had also revealed the hidden structures within himself: resilience, patience, and the capacity for strategic insight. The journey would be difficult, but he was ready. He had seen the fractures. He understood the duplicity and cultivated the calm strength required to face whatever truths lay ahead. And in that readiness, he found a fragile but undeniable sense of empowerment, a clarity that would guide his next steps with precision and purpose. Monday began with an uneasy stillness, the kind of quiet that felt almost tangible. He moved through the motions of his morning routine with deliberate care, observing every detail of her behavior, the subtle way she adjusted her hair, the way her gaze briefly lingered on the phone before looking away, the faint tension in her shoulders as she moved through the kitchen. These small gestures, once unnoticed or dismissed, now carried the weight of intention, deliberate and precise, signaling the dual existence he had been slowly uncovering. Breakfast was subdued. She hummed lightly, flipping through her phone with a practiced casualness. He watched, noting the exact way she held the device, how she positioned it out of reach, the pauses before she responded to messages. Each movement was carefully choreographed, a performance meant to preserve the illusion of normalcy while keeping parts of her life entirely separate. He cataloged every micro-expression, every hesitation, every controlled gesture, understanding that the truth lay not only in words, but in the unspoken, in the subtleties of behavior that revealed the hidden life she had cultivated. At work, he maintained his usual demeanor, outwardly calm, internally vigilant. Colleagues noticed a change in his focus, the intensity of his gaze, the occasional distant look, as if he were elsewhere entirely. It was true, his mind was elsewhere, mapping, connecting, analyzing, every interaction from the past week, replayed in his thoughts, the mentions of friends and colleagues, the subtle evasions, the carefully timed absences. Each pattern became a thread, and together they were weaving a narrative of deliberate concealment that he was determined to unravel. That evening, she mentioned a late meeting with a friend from her book club. He asked casually for details, who would be present, and what they might discuss. Her answers were smooth, names flowing without hesitation, descriptions precise but deliberately vague. Yet, in the microsecond of pause before responding, he detected a flicker, a subtle crack in the controlled surface. Small, almost imperceptible, but meaningful. He filed it away mentally, understanding that these fleeting moments held the key to uncovering the reality behind her carefully maintained facade. She left for her meeting, cheerful and composed, leaving him alone in the apartment with only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant city noise outside. He used the time to reflect, cataloging patterns, inconsistencies, and subtle signals that had accumulated over weeks. The unfairness of it struck him sharply, the ease with which she maintained a parallel existence, the control she exercised, and the exclusion of him from a reality that was partially theirs but partially hers alone. Yet clarity had a powerful effect. With each observation, he reclaimed a measure of control, understanding, and preparedness. Late that night, he began to organize his approach. Observation first, insight second, confrontation last. He considered the small details, the timing of messages, her posture when certain names were mentioned, subtle tonal shifts in conversation. Every observation added depth to his understanding, revealing the extent of the deception and the skill with which she maintained it. He realized that his empowerment did not come from immediate reaction, but from measured, deliberate understanding, the ability to perceive the hidden dynamics before taking action. Over the next several days, he engaged in subtle testing, casual questions designed to elicit reactions without provoking defensive answers. Her responses were polished, often rehearsed, yet minor hesitations and micro-expressions betrayed the reality he had suspected for weeks. The duality was evident. Her public self, warm and composed, contrasted sharply with the private, hidden self that existed elsewhere. Each subtle slip reinforced his understanding, providing him with insights that would guide the eventual confrontation with clarity and purpose. One afternoon, he observed a momentary lapse, a glance at her phone that lingered too long, a soft smile that seemed meant for no one in particular, a pause that carried unspoken significance. These small moments confirmed the pattern he had been following. She was maintaining a parallel life with precision, and he had been deliberately excluded. The unfairness of it was undeniable. Yet within it lay clarity, a framework for understanding, and the knowledge that he could approach the truth strategically rather than impulsively. As the week progressed, he mapped the patterns of her behavior more systematically. Arrival and departure times, subtle changes in routine, and the timing of communications all coalesced into a clearer picture of her hidden interactions. Every minor detail he had previously overlooked now seemed significant. Each micro-expression, each carefully timed gesture, added depth to his understanding of the dual reality she had constructed. The unfairness of her duplicity was stark, yet the insight it provided offered him a quiet form of empowerment, awareness, clarity, and preparation. By midweek, he felt a shift in his own mindset. Anger and hurt were present, yes, but tempered by a growing sense of strategic patience. The power lay not in immediate confrontation, but in deliberate clarity. Each observation, each subtle insight, strengthened his capacity to act decisively when the time came. He began to see the situation not merely as betrayal, but as an opportunity to reclaim agency, define boundaries, and navigate a fractured reality with precision and control. Late one evening, she left her phone unattended briefly. He noticed it immediately, noting the placement, orientation, and her subtle hesitation before leaving it. He did not touch the device, nor did he attempt to read messages. Observation was his priority, and in this moment, even the tiniest gestures revealed volumes. The careful management of secrecy, the skill in maintaining her separate existence, the subtle anxiety beneath her practiced calm, all were pieces of a mosaic he was now able to interpret with growing certainty. The weekend arrived, providing a temporary reprieve from the relentless observation and analysis. She left for a social gathering, leaving him alone to process and reflect. He reviewed all he had observed, analyzed patterns, and considered the steps needed for clarity and eventual confrontation. Every detail, every subtle shift, every micro-expression contributed to his understanding, revealing the depth of her dual existence and the deliberate nature of her actions. By Sunday night, he had achieved a level of clarity he had not possessed in weeks. The unfairness remained, undeniable and painful, yet he was no longer passive. Awareness had become a tool, observation a form of power. He was prepared to navigate the coming days with precision, insight, and strategic patience. The journey ahead would challenge him emotionally, psychologically, and relationally. But he was ready. As he lay awake in the quiet apartment, the weight of betrayal was tempered by a newfound clarity. The patterns were evident, the duplicity undeniable, and the next steps clear. He understood that confrontation would be necessary, but it would be approached with calm precision, strategic thought, and an unwavering commitment to reclaiming his own agency. In that readiness, he found a subtle yet profound empowerment, the ability to face the fractured reality of his relationship with insight, control, and determination. By the early hours of Monday, he reflected on the lessons embedded in the past weeks. Vigilance, observation, strategic patience, and clarity. Betrayal had revealed not only her duplicity, but also the necessity of self-awareness. the importance of understanding patterns, and the value of measured response. The unfairness remained, yet within it lay the tools for empowerment, a path forward defined not by impulse, but by deliberate, thoughtful action. By midweek, the tension in the house had become almost tangible. Every glance, every gesture, every casual phrase was now laden with significance. He observed her with a precision born of necessity, noting how her eyes darted to her phone with practiced ease, how her tone subtly shifted depending on the context, and how she carefully curated every interaction to maintain the dual reality she had created. It was no longer subtle. The patterns were undeniable. She was leading a life apart from him, meticulously crafted, and he was only just beginning to see the full scope of it. He walked through the apartment, cataloging small details he had previously overlooked, receipts tucked into drawers, unusual bank statements, messages he had glimpsed fleetingly. Each piece added to the puzzle, confirming the depth of the duplicity. It wasn't just a single affair or an occasional lie. It was a sustained, deliberate construction of a parallel existence. The unfairness of it hit him anew. Yet within the clarity came a sense of strategic empowerment. He now understood the terrain he was navigating. That evening, she mentioned attending a gathering with friends he didn't know. He asked casually who would be there and what they would discuss. Her response was smooth, names flowing with ease, tone light and conversational. Yet for a brief instant, her eyes flickered slight, almost imperceptible, but enough to signal awareness that he might be observing more than he let on. He filed the detail mentally. Every micro-expression, every hesitation, was a breadcrumb leading him toward the larger truth. While she was gone, he revisited old patterns in his mind, mentally reconstructing her routines, timing, and social interactions. He began to see a network emerge. The names she mentioned casually, the events she attended, the relationships she cultivated, all forming a map of her hidden world. The unfairness of it was sharp, but he recognized that understanding these patterns was a form of agency. Knowledge, after all, offered power, even if the revelations it brought were painful. Later that night, she returned, her energy bright, laughter easy, tone cheerful. She spoke of conversations, events, and interactions. Yet he noticed how rehearsed her words seemed, how carefully she controlled her gestures and expressions. The discrepancy between the reality he had observed and the performance she offered was stark, almost cruel. It was clear she had mastered the art of duality, public warmth paired with private secrecy. And yet, in her flawless execution, he detected the smallest cracks, tiny imperfections that confirmed the truth he had long suspected. By Thursday, he had become acutely aware of his own transformation. The initial shock and anger had given way to strategic clarity. Observation, analysis, and pattern recognition had sharpened his awareness, allowing him to navigate interactions with precision. He no longer reacted impulsively, but instead cataloged every action, every response, every hesitation. The unfairness remained undeniable, yet it no longer controlled him. Clarity had become his tool, patience his ally. One afternoon, a small slip provided more confirmation than he could have hoped for. She laughed softly at a message on her phone, a subtle smile that seemed almost accidental, and then quickly redirected her attention toward him. The briefness of the gesture, the fleeting moment of vulnerability, revealed volumes. It confirmed the duality he had been tracking, the secret life she maintained with meticulous care, and in that confirmation, he felt both pain and empowerment. The unfairness of her deception was undeniable, yet understanding it provided him with a sense of control. That evening, he rehearsed his approach to confrontation in his mind, not with anger or accusation, but with calm, measured precision. He envisioned presenting the facts, pointing out patterns, and asking questions that demanded clarity without allowing deflection. The unfairness of her actions was stark, but he recognized that the power lay in his response, in reclaiming agency over his own life, and in insisting on transparency moving forward. The weekend brought both tension and opportunity. She left for a social event, leaving her phone unattended. He observed it without touching it, noting every subtle gesture as she interacted with the device before stepping out. Her careful control, the skill with which she maintained secrecy, was evident. Yet within these gestures were glimpses of vulnerability, tiny slips that confirmed the reality of her dual life. Observation had become a tool not only to understand her actions, but also to understand his own capacity for resilience and strategic thinking. By Sunday evening, he had mapped her behavior with sufficient clarity to anticipate her next moves. He understood the routines, the timing, the subtle cues, and the strategic concealment she employed. The unfairness of the situation remained, but he had transformed the uncertainty into preparedness. Awareness had become a form of power, insight a form of armor, and clarity a tool for navigating the fractured reality of their relationship. That night, he reflected on what he had learned. Betrayal, while profoundly painful, had illuminated aspects of himself he had long neglected: patience, observation, strategic thought, and resilience. He understood that confronting her would require all of these qualities. He did not anticipate immediate resolution or satisfaction. Instead, he prepared for a measured engagement that would demand honesty, transparency, and the reclamation of agency he had long deferred. Monday arrived once more, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose. The unfairness of her duplicity was undeniable, yet he was no longer passive. He had observed, cataloged, and analyzed the patterns. He had noted every micro-expression, every minor hesitation, every subtle gesture. Each observation had added to a growing clarity, a blueprint for approaching the truth. And in that clarity, he found empowerment, the ability to confront the fractured reality with insight, precision, and deliberate action. He recognized that this confrontation would not be simple. The truth she had concealed was extensive, and the deception had been maintained with remarkable skill. Yet he was ready, not with blind anger, not with impulsive accusation, but with the calm, measured precision of someone who had spent weeks observing, analyzing, and understanding. The unfairness remained, but it had been transformed into preparation, awareness, and strategic clarity. As he sat alone in the quiet apartment, he understood that the journey through betrayal was not merely about exposing deception. It was about reclaiming himself, asserting boundaries, and navigating a fractured reality with insight and strength. The unfairness, while painful, had catalyzed a transformation within him, sharpening his awareness, cultivating patience, and providing the tools to face the truth with controlled resolve. By the late hours, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Observation had revealed patterns. Patterns had revealed the scope of deception, and understanding had provided the clarity necessary for action. He was no longer a passive participant in a story written by omission and secrecy. He was aware, prepared, and empowered. The unfairness of her actions remained undeniable, yet within it lay the framework for reclaiming agency, confronting truth, and navigating the next phase of his life with measured strength and unwavering focus. And so, as dawn approached, he sat quietly, contemplating the path ahead. The deception, the duality, the meticulous concealment, all were clear now. The unfairness was real, yet he had transformed it into a source of insight, clarity, and strategic readiness. He understood that the confrontation would be challenging, emotionally and psychologically, but he was prepared. With awareness, patience, and deliberate action, he would face the fractured reality of his relationship, reclaim his agency, and navigate the coming days with precision and control. The following week began with a tension that felt heavier than usual. Each morning, he watched her move through the house with ease, her routine seemingly unchanged. Yet he noticed the subtle choreography in her gestures, the careful positioning of her phone, the way she glanced at messages before composing herself. the faint tension in her shoulders. Whenever he asked a casual question about her day, he cataloged each detail silently, understanding that each small action was a piece of a larger puzzle, a careful construction of the life she maintained apart from him. He began to structure his own days with intentionality. At work, he maintained the usual professionalism, yet his mind was elsewhere, reviewing interactions, analyzing patterns, and predicting behaviors. Each subtle hesitation in her responses, each pause in conversation, each carefully crafted answer became data points in a mental map he was slowly constructing. He realized that observation, patience, and attention to detail were now his primary tools in navigating the fractured reality of their relationship. That evening, she mentioned attending a networking event with colleagues he had never met. He asked casually who would be there, what the gathering entailed, and what she expected to discuss. Her answers were smooth, confident, and rehearsed, yet he caught micro-expressions, tiny flickers in her eyes, almost imperceptible, that betrayed a momentary awareness of his scrutiny. Each detail was stored in his mind, forming a more complete understanding of the dual life she was leading and the careful orchestration she employed to maintain it. While she was out, he reflected on the patterns he had documented over the past weeks: timing of messages, subtle gestures, changes in routine, all pointed to a life carefully divided. He recognized the unfairness of it, the deliberate exclusion, and yet he also recognized the clarity it provided. Observation had given him insight, and insight had transformed uncertainty into preparedness. Knowledge became a form of power, and understanding the architecture of her deception allowed him to reclaim agency in a life that had been quietly manipulated. When she returned, her demeanor was bright and cheerful. She spoke of conversations and interactions with practiced ease, masking the reality he had already observed. He noticed the rehearsed nature of her words, the careful pacing of her gestures, the subtle timing that suggested control and concealment. The disparity between her public self and the private reality he had pieced together was stark, almost cruel in its precision. Yet, in that recognition, he found empowerment, clarity that would guide his response, strategy, and eventual confrontation. The next days were spent refining his observations and planning his approach. He engaged in casual conversation, asking innocuous questions designed to elicit subtle reactions without prompting defensiveness. Each pause, each hesitation, each micro-expression added to the mental map he had constructed. He understood the structure of her duplicity, the rhythm of her interactions, and the patterns that defined the hidden life she had maintained. One afternoon, a seemingly minor detail offered more confirmation than he could have anticipated. A notification on her phone flashed briefly while she was distracted with chores. He did not touch it, nor attempt to read it. Observation alone was sufficient. The hesitation in her hand, the brief flicker of attention, revealed the careful orchestration of a private world she had cultivated. That moment reinforced the reality he had been tracking. Her life was carefully divided, and he had been intentionally excluded from a portion of it. By midweek, he had reached a critical juncture in his understanding. The patterns were undeniable, the duplicity evident, and the unfairness of the situation clear. Yet, alongside the pain, came a profound sense of clarity and strategic advantage. He now possessed a detailed understanding of her behaviors, timing, and patterns, which allowed him to anticipate her actions and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. Patience, observation, and clarity had become his primary instruments in navigating the fractured reality of their relationship. That night, he spent hours mentally rehearsing the confrontation. He envisioned presenting his observations calmly, without anger, with questions that demanded honesty, while preventing evasion. He recognized that the power lay not in the confrontation itself, but in the preparation, the insight, and the controlled execution of his approach. The unfairness of her actions remained. Yet, he understood that measured strategy would provide him with both clarity and leverage. The weekend offered a temporary reprieve and an opportunity to observe more closely. She left for a gathering with friends, leaving her phone unattended. He observed without touching, noting subtle gestures and micro-expressions as she interacted with the device. The careful control, the precise movements, the faint hints of anxiety beneath the surface all confirmed the dual life he had been tracking. Observation continued to provide him with insight, a steadying sense of power, and the framework for the confrontation that would soon become necessary. By Sunday evening, he had cataloged sufficient details to anticipate her behaviors and responses with near certainty. He had mapped her routines, her gestures, her subtle indicators, and the hidden patterns of her life. The unfairness of the situation was undeniable, yet he was no longer passive. Observation, patience, and strategic insight had transformed uncertainty into preparedness, and clarity had become his form of empowerment. That night, he reflected on the lessons embedded in the past weeks. Betrayal, while deeply painful, had illuminated his own capacity for patience, observation, and strategic thinking. It had revealed the importance of attention to detail, the necessity of mental preparation, and the value of clarity in navigating complex human interactions. He realized that confrontation would require all of these qualities, and that approaching it with calm precision would be more effective than impulsive reaction. Monday arrived once again, bringing with it the anticipation of the confrontation. He had observed, cataloged, and analyzed the patterns of her dual life. He understood the subtle cues, the rehearsed behaviors, and the hidden interactions she had maintained with meticulous care. The unfairness of her duplicity remained. Yet he was prepared. Clarity, insight, and strategic patience had transformed him into an active participant in his own narrative, ready to confront the fractured reality of their relationship with measured control and purposeful action. As he sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on the past weeks, he recognized a profound shift within himself. The betrayal had forced him to refine his awareness, develop patience, and cultivate strategic observation. He understood that empowerment did not arise from anger or retaliation, but from knowledge, clarity, and the careful navigation of a complex and fractured reality. The unfairness remained, but within it lay the tools for reclaiming agency, confronting truth, and asserting boundaries that had long been ignored. By the early hours of Monday, he felt a quiet readiness. The patterns were clear, the duplicity confirmed, and the framework for confrontation firmly in place. He was no longer a passive participant in a story shaped by omission and secrecy. Awareness had provided clarity, observation had provided insight, and patience had provided the strength to navigate the challenges ahead. The unfairness of her actions, while painful, had become the catalyst for empowerment, strategy, and deliberate action. In the stillness of the night, he contemplated the journey ahead. Betrayal had illuminated not only the fractured reality of their relationship, but also the depth of his own capacity for resilience, insight, and strategic thinking. He understood that the confrontation would be challenging, but he was ready. Awareness, clarity, and measured action would guide him through the complexities of the situation, enabling him to reclaim agency, assert boundaries, and navigate the fractured reality with purpose and precision. As dawn approached, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The unfairness of her duplicity remained undeniable, yet within it, he had discovered clarity, empowerment, and strategic advantage. Observation, patience, and careful analysis had transformed him from a passive participant into an active agent in his own life. The confrontation would come, but when it did, he would face it with insight, preparation, and deliberate action, reclaiming control over his reality and the narrative that had long been shaped without his consent. The first signs of change came quietly, almost imperceptibly. She arrived home later than usual on Friday evening, her energy unusually bright, her conversation animated, but there was a subtle tension beneath the surface that he noticed immediately. He watched the way she moved, The slight hesitation in her gestures, the fleeting flicker in her eyes when she glanced at her phone, every detail reinforced the reality he had been piecing together for weeks. She was maintaining a carefully constructed dual life, and the moment for revelation was approaching. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he observed, cataloging each subtle movement, each carefully timed gesture, each moment of control or hesitation. He recognized that the unfairness of her actions was undeniable, yet acting impulsively would only invite obfuscation. Patience had become his ally, clarity, his weapon. He allowed the weekend to unfold with calculated vigilance, each interaction providing more data for the confrontation that was now inevitable. Saturday morning began with him noting minor but meaningful inconsistencies in her stories. A mention of brunch with a friend, a casual remark about an errand, a fleeting reference to a colleague, all of these, he realized, fit into a larger pattern. He began mentally mapping the connections, constructing a network of behaviors and interactions that painted a clear picture of her hidden life. Every pause, every shift in tone, every subtle gesture became a clue, reinforcing the narrative he had been piecing together for weeks. By afternoon, he had begun to see the structure of her duplicity in sharp relief. He noticed the patterns of timing, the calculated avoidance of certain topics, the subtle orchestration of her presence and absence. Each detail contributed to a mosaic of truth, revealing not only the extent of her deception, but also the skill with which it had been executed. The unfairness was undeniable, yet clarity was his reward, offering insight and strategic advantage in the confrontation that would soon be necessary. Later, as she prepared for an evening engagement, he observed her with a level of scrutiny that was both painful and illuminating. The careful positioning of her phone, the subtle timing of her movements, the deliberate pacing of her conversation, all spoke to a mastery of concealment and control. He recognized the duality in her behavior, the composed, cheerful partner he saw at home, and the private, hidden self that existed elsewhere. The contrast was stark, and it crystallized the unfairness of the situation, yet also provided him with the clarity he needed to navigate the fractured reality of their relationship. That evening, as she left for her event, he reviewed his observations from the week. He traced the network of interactions, the timing of messages, the subtle gestures, and micro-expressions that had betrayed her duplicity. He realized that every small slip, every hesitation, every delayed response, every carefully managed detail had built a body of evidence that could no longer be ignored. Observation, patience, and strategic analysis had become his tools for reclaiming agency in a situation that had long excluded him. Returning to the apartment after she departed, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The unfairness of her behavior was undeniable, yet he recognized a profound insight. Betrayal, while painful, had illuminated aspects of himself he had previously overlooked. His capacity for patience, observation, and strategic thought had been honed, and he understood that clarity and careful preparation would serve him better than immediate reaction. He began mentally rehearsing the confrontation, anticipating possible responses, and considering how best to assert boundaries and reclaim control over his own life. Saturday night was spent in quiet contemplation. He reviewed the patterns he had observed, the behaviors she had exhibited, and the small slips that had revealed the hidden structure of her dual life. He considered the emotional weight of the confrontation to come, yet tempered it with strategic focus. Anger and hurt were present, but they were subordinated to clarity and purpose. He understood that the confrontation would require calm, precision, and unwavering attention to the facts he had gathered. Sunday arrived with a mixture of tension and preparation. She returned home in the late afternoon, energetic and animated, her conversation smooth and rehearsed. Yet he noticed subtle indicators, the way her eyes momentarily flicked to her phone, the brief hesitation before she answered a question, the slight tension in her movements. Each observation reinforced the narrative he had been constructing, confirming the duality of her life and the careful orchestration with which she maintained it. The unfairness was stark, yet his insight had transformed the situation from chaos into clarity. That evening, he began mentally rehearsing the confrontation in detail. He visualized presenting the patterns he had observed, asking precise questions, and maintaining calm authority. He considered possible evasions, practiced responses, and anticipated shifts in her demeanor. The unfairness of her actions remained undeniable, yet the clarity he had achieved allowed him to approach the confrontation strategically, with focus and purpose. The betrayal had illuminated not only her duplicity, but also his own capacity for strategic awareness and measured action. By nightfall, he was prepared. Observation had provided clarity, analysis had provided insight, and strategic rehearsal had provided readiness. The unfairness of her actions, while painful, had catalyzed a transformation within him, a honing of patience, perception, and tactical thinking. He understood that the confrontation would not merely expose her deception, but would also assert his agency, define boundaries, and reclaim control over the fractured reality of their relationship. Monday approached, and with it, a sense of inevitability. The evidence was clear, the patterns undeniable, and the confrontation unavoidable. Yet he felt a calm readiness, born of careful observation and meticulous analysis. He had transformed the unfairness into strategic insight, the betrayal into preparation, and the uncertainty into clarity. Each observation, each subtle gesture, each minor slip she had made over weeks had provided him with the tools necessary to face the truth without being overwhelmed by emotion. In the quiet hours before dawn, he contemplated the journey ahead. The confrontation would be challenging, both emotionally and psychologically, but he was prepared. Awareness had provided him with clarity. Observation had provided insight, and strategic patience had fortified his resolve. The unfairness of her duplicity remained, but it had become a catalyst for empowerment, equipping him to navigate the fractured reality with precision, focus, and determination. As the city stirred outside, he felt a steady calm. He had seen the patterns, understood the duplicity, and prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation. Betrayal, while profoundly painful, had revealed both the depth of her concealment and the strength of his own insight. The unfairness was undeniable, yet within it lay opportunity, the chance to reclaim agency, assert boundaries, and navigate the fractured reality with clarity, strategic purpose, and unwavering resolve. By early morning, he understood that the confrontation would not be a moment of dramatic revelation alone. It would be a deliberate, measured engagement, rooted in observation, analysis, and strategic foresight. The unfairness of her actions, though painful, had illuminated a path to empowerment. Observation had provided clarity, clarity had provided insight, and insight had provided the readiness to face the fractured reality with precision, control, and determination. And so he waited, not passively, but with awareness, patience, and strategic resolve. Each detail he had observed, each subtle gesture, each small slip had prepared him for the confrontation that would finally bring truth into the open. The unfairness remained, undeniable, but it had been transformed into clarity, insight, and the power to reclaim agency over his own life, to navigate the complexities of betrayal, and to assert boundaries that had long been ignored. By midweek, the apartment had grown tense with the quiet weight of anticipation. Every movement, every glance, every carefully crafted gesture she made carried meaning he could no longer ignore. He observed her closely, noting the subtle rhythm of her phone use, the faint flickers of hesitation in her expressions, and the micro-adjustments she made in her posture whenever he asked casual questions about her day. It was clear now that she was maintaining a dual existence, one meticulously constructed and carefully hidden from him, and the evidence was impossible to deny. He did not confront her immediately. Patience had become a tool as powerful as observation. Acting impulsively, might provoke defensiveness, denial, or further deception. Instead, he cataloged every detail in his mind, mentally mapping the network of interactions, behaviors, and routines that formed her hidden life. Each micro-expression, each brief pause, each carefully timed gesture added depth to his understanding of the reality she had created apart from him. Friday arrived with the subtle tension that had become almost constant. She mentioned attending a work event, one he had not been invited to. He asked casually who would be present, what the purpose of the gathering was, and what her expectations might be. Her responses were smooth and rehearsed, yet he detected tiny micro-expressions, brief flickers of hesitation, subtle shifts in posture that revealed more than her words ever could. These small cracks confirmed the duality he had been observing and further solidified the unfairness of the situation. While she was out, he reflected on the week's observations, mentally revisiting the past week's interactions. Each carefully orchestrated movement, each evasive answer, and each moment of controlled demeanor coalesced into a coherent pattern. The unfairness of her actions was undeniable, yet the clarity it provided him was invaluable. Observation had become a form of empowerment, allowing him to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with strategic foresight. That evening, she returned with her usual composed demeanor, light in conversation, warm in tone, yet the rehearsed nature of her words did not escape him. He noted the subtle choreography in her behavior, the way she held her phone, the deliberate timing of her gestures, and the controlled pacing of her speech. The contrast between the hidden life he had observed and the persona she presented to him was stark. The unfairness was sharp, yet with it came clarity, strategic insight, and the tools he needed to navigate the fractured reality of their relationship. Saturday morning brought further opportunity for observation. She left for errands. Leaving her phone unattended for a brief period, he noted its placement, the orientation, and her brief hesitation before leaving it behind. He did not touch the device. Yet the subtle cues in her behavior provided additional confirmation of the dual life she maintained. Each small gesture, previously overlooked, now carried weight, adding layers of understanding that strengthened his preparation for the confrontation to come. By mid-afternoon, he began mapping her social interactions and routines in his mind with increasing precision. Timing of messages, the cadence of her conversations, and the subtle adjustments in her schedule all fit into a pattern that revealed the structure of her hidden existence. Observation had transformed uncertainty into knowledge, chaos into clarity. The unfairness of her deception was undeniable, yet it had become the foundation upon which he could build strategic insight and measured response. That evening, she returned with the same practiced cheerfulness, yet he noticed the slight tension beneath the surface. The rhythm of her gestures, the brief glances at her phone, and the controlled pacing of her words all spoke to a meticulous orchestration he had come to recognize. He realized that her ability to maintain dual lives was both precise and deliberate, and that his own role required calm observation, analytical thinking, and careful preparation. By late Saturday night, he had rehearsed the confrontation in his mind. He envisioned presenting his observations with clarity, asking precise questions, and maintaining a controlled, composed demeanor. Anger and pain were present, yet they were tempered by understanding and strategy. The unfairness of her actions, while deeply painful, had illuminated patterns, revealed behaviors, and provided him with the insight necessary to approach the confrontation with calculated precision. Sunday morning brought an acute awareness of the stakes. The patterns of her dual life were clear, the duplicity undeniable, and the unfairness of her behavior stark. Yet, he was no longer passive. Observation had provided clarity, analysis had offered insight, and strategic rehearsal had fortified his readiness. The confrontation, once terrifying in its inevitability, was now something he could approach with focus, calm, and a sense of measured purpose. Throughout the day, he reviewed the sequences he had observed, the timing of her interactions, the small slips, the fleeting hesitations, and the micro-expressions that betrayed her concealed world, each element reinforced the same conclusion. She had carefully curated a life that existed alongside their shared reality, and he had been deliberately excluded. The unfairness was undeniable, yet the knowledge he had accumulated provided him with a sense of empowerment. Clarity had become strength, insight had become agency. Observation had become a tool to navigate the fractured reality of their relationship. That evening, he reflected on the weeks of observation and analysis. Betrayal, while painful, had illuminated his own capacity for strategic thinking, patience, and self-awareness. He understood that the confrontation would require careful control, a measured presentation of facts, and unwavering focus. He recognized that the unfairness of her actions was not only a challenge to the relationship, but also a catalyst for his own growth and empowerment. By nightfall, he felt a steady readiness. Observation, insight, and strategic thinking had transformed him from a passive participant into an active agent in his own life. The unfairness of her deception remained, yet it had become a framework for clarity, preparation, and deliberate action. He understood that confronting her would not be a single moment of revelation, but a careful engagement, rooted in evidence, pattern recognition, and control. As the night deepened, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The journey through betrayal had revealed the depth of her duplicity and the precision with which she maintained her hidden life. Yet, it had also revealed his own capacity for patience, observation, and strategic analysis. Awareness, clarity, and preparation had become his tools for reclaiming agency, asserting boundaries, and navigating the fractured reality of their relationship with deliberate, controlled action. By the early hours of Monday, he felt an unwavering sense of readiness. The patterns were clear, the duplicity confirmed, and the confrontation inevitable. Yet he was no longer fearful, no longer passive. Observation had provided clarity, analysis had provided insight, and strategic patience had provided readiness. The unfairness of her actions, though painful, had become a catalyst for empowerment, equipping him to reclaim agency, navigate the fractured reality of their relationship, and approach the coming confrontation with focus, precision, and determination. Life often challenges us with moments of betrayal, deception, and unexpected pain. Yet, it is precisely in these moments that our true strength emerges. The journey through heartbreak is never easy, but it teaches us patience, resilience, and the power of self-awareness. When we face the truth with clarity, observe with intention, and respond with wisdom rather than impulsivity, we reclaim control over our own lives. Every hardship, no matter how unfair, carries a lesson. The importance of setting boundaries, valuing ourselves, and embracing the courage to rebuild, even when trust has been broken. True empowerment comes not from retaliation, but from understanding, growth, and the determination to rise stronger than before. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more powerful, emotional stories that inspire, challenge, and move us all.